Okay. Well, I'm to talk about what we've learned about governance from COVID. We've already, in this wonderfully organized symposium, we should all be so indebted to Margaret Proctor and Bill and all the committee who put this together. But we've already had some interesting points about governance. We learned from Dr. Shane Brown about the challenges of experts advising generalists in government, politicians who are generalists. And that was a particular challenge. And from Andrew Bourgeois, we were reminded of the pathology of poverty, a distribution, public policy issue that needs to urgently be addressed. I'm going to talk mostly about what we've learned about world, global, this planet's governance. Yeah, we live on a planet, you know. Well, I'm going to start with a couple of points that haven't yet been made about more local issues and aspects of government that I think I at least have learned something about, and maybe you. The first is our federal system of government. Oh boy, did you hear that word? Is there anything duller for you than a talk about federalism? Please take some cold water. I'm going to talk about federalism for a bit. Our federal system of government seems to me has functioned well in responding to the pandemic. The central government, led by Trudeau Liberals, give you a moment to hold your nose if you wish, in a more minority government situation, has been reasonably efficient in getting vaccines into our country. There has been a variety of responses from the provinces and territories in their regulatory role on public health measures or mandates. Some have been pretty good, others not so good. But here's the point. That's what we should expect in a federation. Provinces are the political laboratories of a federal country. There are political laboratories. At this very moment, in responding to the sixth wave, there are clearly differences among our 10 provinces and 3 territories. Some are being much less cautious than others, and it's difficult to be really sure about how cautious we should be. Federal countries, I think, key point, are better suited to handle uncertainties in public policy than unitary states, in which there's a danger that with only one government, they'll make the wrong decision. I don't know how many Canadians have really been thinking of federalism, or even how many attendees of this wonderful symposium are prepared to think about. Probably not very much, but I think appreciation of federalism is something that COVID should have strengthened. My second point about what we Canadians have learned about governance from the pandemic, or what should have learned, is about government control of the police. Yeah, you heard, I said the word police. Here I'm talking about, of course, those anti-vaxxers who use convoys of trucks to protest government mandates, which became, you think of it, only with the pandemic, did regulations become mandates. And there's a reason for that change in public vocabulary. It was those trucker convoys protesting government mandates aimed at reducing the spread of COVID. What powers did government have to stop the truckers from blocking our border with the United States and blocking the streets of Ottawa? What we should have learned is this, that without invoking any emergency legislation, I'll drop my voice, that's the point. Our elected government possessed all the legal powers and police resources they needed to overcome that threat to our economy and the freedom of our citizens to use their streets. In terms of law and resources, invoking emergency legislation was, as I argued in the Globe and Mail on March 5th of this year, unnecessary. But apparently, it was necessary from a psychological point of view for federal, provincial governments to show that they were going to do what was necessary to remove the inconvenience of the truckers' convoy. It was just political show business. And I consider that unfortunate. In a democracy, emergency powers should be used very sparingly by governments, and only in situations where they truly do not have the authority they need to deal effectively with threats to our security. Now, I want to raise my gaze and yours to what we've learned about global world governance, or the lack thereof, from the pandemic. One thing which the pandemic has done has made the World Health Organization, WHO, better known to the people on the planet as just WHO, made it better known. WHO is the United Nations agency. It was established in 1948, and in the spirit of full disclosure, I must confess that my mother's first cousin, Brock Chisholm, was WHO's first director. My cousin Brock became somewhat infamous for advocating the banning of Santa Claus, because Brock Chisholm claimed it causes children to distrust their parents. That's how the world responded to cousin Brock, just as you had. In dealing with the coronavirus, I think the most useful thing, and it was very useful, that WHO has done is to declare a global pandemic, as it did on March the 12th, 2019. No state, no single state authority could have done that with the worldwide credibility of the World Health Organization. Clearly, the WHO Declaration did not convince all governments, didn't convince all political leaders, all influential people, and some ordinary citizens to just think things through for themselves, that there was a global pandemic. But it did the best that any international authority could have done, I think. WHO also began reporting and continues to report on the incidence of the disease and the deaths caused by it in all parts of the world. That data provides evidence of the greater suffering COVID has inflicted on the populations of countries which are predominantly non-white and poor. Dr. Alison McGear's slide this morning, think back to that, showed us that in the map in one of her slides. And I think it's safe to say that that disparity of suffering is the result of inadequate access to vaccines. Rich white countries and China have been stockpiling effective vaccines and have more than they need. They have more than they need for their own populations. Up to now, WHO seems to be unable to do anything about this, but it has no power to order manufacturers of vaccines or governments to stockpile them to make them available to other third world countries. At least has no powers it could back up with criminal sanctions. This prompts me, and you with me, I hope, to consider the United Nations lack of power as an international governing institution. Do you want a more effective global governance? That's the question I want you to consider. I do. I fear that without effective global governance, our species and our planet is not likely to survive. Not that it's just might not survive, it's unlikely to survive. That's all you folks, everything you know, in this whole wonderful world of ours. The United Nations, with its 193 member states, is a logical place to start in building an effective world government. How can the UN and its agency be made more effective, more powerful? In my sovereignty book, which, thank you, Bill had kindly mentioned, Sovereignty, the Biography of a Claim, I tell the story of, here's a new name for you, Hamilton Holt, H-O-L-T. He was a wealthy American businessman, and he organized a conference at Rollins College in Florida in the spring of 1946, a year after the founding of the United Nations in San Francisco. Holt was convinced that the UN was not strong enough because it left sovereignty with individual states. He believed that the UN should be turned into a government with its own independent sovereign power to control at this stage, he's mostly worried about the need to control the armed forces of all the countries in the world. As I wrote in the book, the Rollins College meeting was hardly a gathering of Jewy-eyed radicals. It included the president of Standard Oil, the chairman of the National Association of Manufacturers, 3 US senators, a Supreme Court justice, a congressman, and Albert Einstein. You've heard of him, I think. They all supported Hamilton Holt's appeal to the peoples of the world, calling for the UN General Assembly to be transformed into the legislature of a world government. As you all know, the appeal to the peoples of the world issued by this prestigious group that assembled at Walden's College bore no fruit. Sovereign power remains the monopoly of individual nation states. The five permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, Britain, China, France, Russia, and the United States, hold a veto over anything the UN's member states might wish to do. The current situation in Ukraine makes us painfully aware of the UN's capacity to protect the sovereignty of Ukraine, something so much desired by a majority of the world's population and a majority of its sovereign states. Well, the likelihood of the permanent members of the UN Security Council giving up their veto is small. I think it is worth, just take a moment, thinking about if they were to do so, if some miracle was to happen, what would happen? Could we get closer to an effective UN? It's here I come back to my belief in the merits of federalism, because the General Assembly, which Henry Holt and his friends thought could be a world government, it's just a collection of diplomats. It's just a collection of diplomats. Its Secretary General is an appointed person with a small staff. He cannot exercise intelligently and democratically the kind of world government that we need. And here I want you to think about, just for a moment, come up and dream with me. Please dream. Put your dream caps on. What is it we need a world government for? Well, in my first draft of my book, which was before the pandemic, I said there were 4 basic threats to our planet and our species. Certainly the one that group at Walden's College was aware of, weapon, although we broadened it. It wasn't just the atom bomb, it's weapons of mass destruction. And we're very conscious now. I'm watching as soon as I get home whether poison gas has been released after a successful charge of the Ukraine army in the Donbass. Look for that on the news. That's crazy that could happen. So the first is weapons of mass destruction. Second, human is climate warming. I'm not going to enlarge on that, but I think unless we do what's necessary, this world is not going to be livable for many, many people. And with that goes the migration of populations, some for political reasons, which you're watching now, but others for climate reasons, whose homes are being inundated by water, and they have to move. And we sovereign states control who comes across our border. So those are the 3 existential threats. Weapons of mass destruction, okay. Climate change, global warming, second. And the third is the mobility, the migration of masses, millions of people. Now, I hope maybe you're with me a bit about, yeah, it would be nice to have a government that could deal with those existential threats. And now I'm going to do something very daring. I'm going to give you a new idea, which I would bet 99% of you and the people on Zoom haven't heard of before. How would a global government be formed? Well, it would be federal. That's not a new idea. But think of what a federal government is. A federal government, there are the units of the federation, right? We have provinces in Canada, cantons in Switzerland, states in the US. Those are the units, the local units. This backwards technology again. That's part of the federation, but to go beyond the confederate, our confederation, which is what the UN is, to a global federation, you need a central government. And that central government should have very, very limited powers. Just powers to deal with those existential threats I've identified. Most of everyday government, everything from transportation, administration of justice, education, social welfare, economic well-being, and so on, should be and stay and remain in the hands and the responsibility of member states. They don't give up very much. They wouldn't be willing to give up very much. My hope is that they might give up enough to make that world government effective and democratic. There's the idea. How do we elect the central government? Sure, we got to elect it. And here comes the new idea. Grab your chair. I don't want you to fall off. The constituencies for voting for the assembly of the central government, of the legislature, will be based on the day you were born. Base temporalism, this is called. Not where you live. Peter Alberti, when were you born? Well, what's your month?
20th of August.
30th of August. 30th of August. Charlie, when were you born? What's your month? What day were you born? March 3rd. Well, Charlie belongs to March 3rd, Peter to the August 30th. I'm a November 16th guy. Those are our ridings, our constituencies. And here, this lousy old technology I'm poo-pooing comes into handy, because with the internet, and we experience more and more of what you can do on the internet, we know, I'm November 16, we November 16s could be in constant touch with each other. We could carry on our politics online, and we would have under politics. Under this system of temporalism, and I first learned about temporalism, representing people by the date they were born, rather than the geography, the place where they live. I learned it from Bruno Morowitz, a wonderful philosophy professor, many years ago at Trinity College. But under temporalism, there would be political parties. You bet you would. And they would compete online for the vote in general elections. And they debate different ways of dealing with those existential threats I talked about. But it is, I think, unlikely that successful, a party to be successful, but in the get a majority or form a minority government in this temporalist world assembly, very unlikely that it will be tied to the interests of any one member state, even China. However, let's just for a moment come down from Peter's daydream and think just for a moment about what we've been thinking, talking all day. I added an epilogue to my book at the wish of University Press about the pandemic, and added dealing with a worldwide pandemic to those three existential threats: climate warming, weapons of mass destruction, and human migration. But what I've learned today and in other readings, and just preparing for today's talk, is we, right now, without doing anything to change the UN in any structural way, we can fix, this is the good news I'm going to end on, we can fix the main inadequacy of the World Health Organization's response to COVID. Well, any change in the UN, all that is needed is for the General Assembly to authorize the payment of enough money to enable the World Health Organization to buy vaccines to meet the needs of poor countries and to distribute them to those countries. I can see no reason for stopping this. I think after your day, you should email Bobby Ray, who is so often in this room, now our ambassador to the UN, and tell him to get rolling. Get rolling, Bob. Get a motion developed in the General Assembly to buy more vaccines, to buy them. You have to raise some money from the General Assembly. And even if those 5 SOBs on the security count permanent members don't chip in any money, you surely get enough from the other of the 193 member state governments to buy the vaccines you knew. There's no need to do anything more, right? We can do it now. That's the good news. Thank you very much.